$600 billion and more in taxes and tariffs from China.
We're talking about trade with China. Yes, it might not sound thrilling, but stick with me. Back in 2018, President Trump decided to impose tariffs on Chinese goods. These tariffs were essentially taxes on products coming from China. What this meant was that these goods became more expensive for Americans to buy. Trump argued that this move was necessary to protect American jobs and industries. He claimed that China was engaging in unfair trade practices like stealing intellectual property and flooding the market with cheap goods. So, these tariffs were aimed at a wide range of products. We're talking about steel, aluminum, electronics, and a whole lot more. Some of these tariffs were pretty hefty, going up to 25%. Imagine walking into your favorite store and finding that everything suddenly costs 25% more. Ouch, right? That's the kind of shock businesses had to deal with. Many small businesses struggled to cope with these sudden price hikes. Now you might be thinking, well, if it hurts China, maybe it's worth it. But hold on a second, it's not that simple. The tariffs also had a ripple effect on the global economy. For instance, American farmers were hit hard because China retaliated with its own tariffs on American goods. This meant that products like soybeans and pork, which American farmers export to China, suddenly had fewer buyers. And it wasn't just farmers. Manufacturers who relied on Chinese parts found themselves paying more, which often meant higher prices for consumers. The stock market also reacted to the uncertainty, with fluctuations that made investors nervous. So, while the idea was to protect American interests, the reality was a bit more complicated. Trade wars are tricky, and the impact of these tariffs is still being debated today. So next time you hear about tariffs, remember, it's not just a boring topic, it's something that can affect your wallet and the economy in ways you might not expect. Trump's tariffs had two big goals. These goals were central to his administration's economic policy and were often highlighted in his speeches and public addresses. First, he wanted to fix what he saw as a trade imbalance. This imbalance, according to Trump, was detrimental to the American economy and needed immediate correction. China was selling America way more stuff than we were selling them. This flood of Chinese goods into the American market was seen as a threat to domestic industries. This resulted in a trade deficit. A trade deficit occurs when a country imports more goods than it exports, leading to a negative balance of trade. Second, Trump wanted to protect American businesses and jobs. He believed that by imposing tariffs, he could shield American industries from unfair foreign competition. He argued that China was cheating by subsidizing its industries and stealing American intellectual property. These practices, he claimed, gave Chinese companies an unfair advantage in the global market. The idea was that these tariffs would force China to negotiate fairer trade deals. By applying economic pressure, Trump hoped to bring China to the negotiating table to establish more balanced trade agreements. Trump thought they would make American companies more competitive and bring back manufacturing jobs to the U.S. He envisioned a resurgence of American manufacturing, with factories reopening and new jobs being created. But, as with most things in life, there were unintended consequences. These tariffs led to higher prices for consumers and retaliatory tariffs from other countries, which hurt American farmers and manufacturers. Consumers faced higher prices on everyday goods, and American farmers struggled to find markets for their produce. The tariffs, while intended to protect American jobs, ended up creating new challenges for many. The debate over the effectiveness of Trump's tariffs continues. Some argue they were necessary to address long-standing trade issues, while others believe they caused more harm than good. Regardless of where one stands on the issue, it's clear that Trump's trade policies have had a significant impact on the American economy and the global trade landscape. Remember those tariffs making Chinese goods more expensive? Well, guess what? American businesses and consumers felt the pinch. Companies that relied on Chinese imports saw their costs skyrocket. They had to raise prices, and consumers ended up paying more for everyday stuff. Think about it. Cars, washing machines, smartphones, everything got more expensive. And what happens when things get more expensive? People buy less. That hurt American businesses. On top of that, the tariffs led to job losses in key industries. Manufacturing, for example, took a hit because those companies rely on global supply chains. Now let's talk about one industry that got hammered: agriculture. You see, China was a huge buyer of American agricultural products, especially soybeans. They used soybeans for animal feed and cooking oil, but when the trade war started, China retaliated with tariffs of their own on American soybeans. Suddenly, American soybeans became more expensive for Chinese buyers. They started looking elsewhere for soybeans. Countries like Brazil and Argentina were more than happy to fill the gap. American farmers lost a massive market for their products, prices plummeted, and many farmers struggled to stay afloat. Section 5. China adapts, finding new markets, growing their own. While American farmers were hurting, China wasn't just sitting around. They started looking for new places to buy soybeans and other goods. They struck deals with countries like Brazil, Argentina, and Russia. Basically, they diversified their supply chains. But here's the real kicker. China also started ramping up its own domestic production. They invested heavily in agriculture, trying to become more self-sufficient. They figured, why rely on the US when we can grow our own soybeans? It was a smart, long-term strategy that could have lasting consequences for American farmers. Biden's challenge tensions remain high, so Trump's gone, but the trade war continues. President Biden inherited this whole mess. He's under pressure from some folks to be tough on China, but he's also got to deal with the economic fallout from the tariffs. It's a real pickle. The Biden administration is trying to figure out a new approach to China. They're talking about working with allies to pressure China on trade practices. But it's a delicate balancing act. They don't want to start a full-blown trade war, but they also need to protect American interests. Minerals at a standstill. China tightens the screws. And just when you thought things couldn't get more complicated, China decided to play hardball. In a move that sent shockwaves through global markets, China announced new export restrictions on critical minerals. These minerals are essential for a wide range of high-tech products, from smartphones to electric vehicles. Remember those critical minerals we need for all our fancy technology? We're talking about the building blocks of modern life. Without them, our gadgets and devices would be nothing more than fancy paperweights. Things like lithium for batteries, which power everything from our smartphones to electric cars. Lithium is a key component in the rechargeable batteries that are driving the green energy revolution. And rare earth elements for electronics, yeah, that stuff. These elements are crucial for the production of a wide range of electronic devices, including the screens and circuits that make our gadgets work. Well, China is the world's leading supplier of many of these minerals. They have some of the largest reserves and most advanced mining operations on the planet, and guess what they did? In a strategic move, they decided to limit the export of these critical minerals. This decision has far-reaching implications for global supply chains and the tech industry. They slapped export restrictions on those minerals. This means that companies around the world, especially in the United States, will find it much harder and more expensive to obtain these essential materials. That means it's now harder and more expensive for American companies to get their hands on them. The impact is already being felt, with prices for these minerals skyrocketing and supply chains facing significant disruptions. It's a strategic move by China to gain leverage in the trade war. By controlling the supply of these critical minerals, China is positioning itself as a key player in the global economy, with the power to influence the production and pricing of high-tech goods worldwide. Finding a way out, the need for balance. So, where do we go from here? It's clear that the trade war isn't working the way anyone hoped. Tariffs have hurt American businesses and consumers. They've also strained relations with China. We need to find a way to address our trade concerns with China without resorting to these blunt instruments. That means engaging in serious negotiations, finding common ground, and maybe even making some compromises. The future of trade cooperation or conflict. The future of the global economy depends on how the US and China navigate this trade relationship. We can choose the path of cooperation and find mutually beneficial solutions, or we can continue down the road of conflict, which will only lead to more uncertainty and economic pain. The choice is ours, and frankly the stakes are too high to get it wrong. That's it for tonight. Thanks you for watching.